Hello, disciples, and welcome to another episode of Imagine with Me, a wonderful opportunity I have to listen and converse with several innovative and exciting leaders around the church. And today I am excited to be joined by Chaplain Owen Chandler, who serves as a chaplain in the United States Army. Owen is also an ordained disciples minister, and I'm so delighted to have him with us today. So welcome, Chaplain Chandler.
Hey, GMP. Great to be here with you.
Yes, my friend. That's our little exchange. It's so good to see you, and I have been had the privilege of preaching when you were pastoring at Saguaro Christian Church in Arizona, and have followed your ministry as you've been deployed and then back home again. And so we're delighted. We'll talk a little bit later, but you are going to be our preacher for General Assembly for the opening night in Louisville on July 29th. So we're just thrilled about that. But I want you to share with the church a little bit about your own ministry and your work, and then we'll talk a little bit about the importance of chaplaincy and I hope the church will get a better sense of the importance of that ministry from what you share with us today. So tell us a little bit about yourself and your ministry and your chaplaincy.
Perfect. I appreciate that. Yeah. So I am a lifelong disciple. Came from a disciple family, several generations there in Western Kentucky. Actually, not real far from where General Assembly is going to be happening along the Ohio River. So grew up disciples, went to disciples college there at Transylvania University there in Lexington, Kentucky, and then went out for the Great Texas Experiment, did Bright Divinity. And so always been fully immersed in the disciples congregations. Got to serve as a disciples pastor for 14 years before transitioning fully into active duty Army chaplaincy. So big fan of the disciples brand, big fan of you in particular. I got to tell all my friends that I was going to get to be on this with you. There's a bunch of us fanboys that follow you and watch all this stuff. So very excited.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's a mutual admiration society. I'm excited to bet that you're going to be preaching, and I've always appreciated how authentic you are in your ministry and how passionate you are about making sure that the church recognizes and supports military chaplains. That was our first conversation, was how can we ensure that chaplains are seen and heard and supported. So tell us a little bit about military chaplaincy. People are probably more familiar with hospital chaplains. More of our clergy do that kind of chaplaincy than do military chaplaincy. But tell us a little bit about military chaplaincy and what makes it different from other modes of ministry.
So to me, military chaplaincy is a gift. It really is a blessing. You get to, especially in the Army. So each branch of the military is a little bit different. But in the Army, you're an embedded asset within the organizations that you serve. So currently, I'm a brigade chaplain, and so I am embedded on the staff there. I'm on the personal staff of the commander, and where they go, I go. And so a lot of times the way I talk about it is that I get to be an embedded presence of hope wherever we are in the world. And to me, that's really meaningful because with our military, our military serves at the behest of civilian leadership. And so, it is our civilian leaders that send us to places all around the world. And a lot of those places are dangerous. And so, I get to be present with, our nation's sons and daughters who are serving on the behalf of their friends and neighbors and family members. And I get to go to some truly, dangerous places, but also at the same time, hopeful places. And I get to remind them of their own humanity. I get to remind them of the light that exists within them. And I just get to be there for them, however they need me to be with them. And so it's a pretty cool job. It's a very physical job. It's a job that has sent me to the Middle East twice. For 2 different combat deployments, and it is it's a very physical job. So every day I got to wake up and go run and do a bunch of stuff that makes me feel like, definitely makes me feel my age as I get older. But it's great. It really is great. I appreciate you asking about that.
Yeah. So, what, what, how did you discern a call, I guess, to military chaplaincy? What was that experience? What's your call story? Maybe that's a better way to ask the question.
So my call story into ministry starts in Camp Kumbaya there in Western Kentucky. I always joke that I'm the cliche church camp kid that was, there at church camp, senior year of high school, was one of those last nights around the campfire, and and truly had a beautiful experience at church camp, like so many ministers, and so that started the call. And then as I got more and more into college and into seminary, I always figured that my call into ministry was going to be kind of non-traditional, but and so when I was in seminary, I did a lot of stuff with Dr. Daisy Machado down with her Borderlands Institute, and actually studied in Nicaragua for a while. And then I, got to do a lot of Black church studies with Dr. Stacey Floyd Thomas, and I just loved, like, I loved how broad and diverse the church became in seminary. And then so I always joked that when I was getting ready to leave seminary, I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do as long as it's not serving a church, and ended up serving a church and loving it, absolutely loving it, and worked with some of the most gifted, amazing ministers who acted as mentors and peers. And it was through those journey of like learning the beauty of the church that I would meet people who were veterans. I would meet people who were still currently serving. One of the senior pastors I was working for, his son was a Marine during the height of the surge in Iraq, and met him after his 2 deployments. And through that friendship, really kind of opened the idea of, this notion of military chaplaincy. It helped that one of my best friends in the denomination, Russ Boyd, started doing reserve Army chaplaincy. And so I started segueing into it. And the more that I segued into it, the more that, as my wife would tell you, that I just love it. Like, I love the way that my call gets to be expressed and shaped and formed and humbled, in these types of settings that so often happen outside of the walls of the church. And so the more that I did it, the more, I always kind of said that I was building bridges, right? Bridges between the civilian world and the military world. And, it's just one of those things that the more I did it, the more that it really spoke to the dynamic nature of how I understood God calling me into ministry. And so in 2020, had the opportunity to come on active duty. The Saguaro Christian Church, where I had been serving for 8 years, was at a transition place. That it's a beautiful, amazing congregation down there, doing a lot of amazing things. And there was a natural transition scene. The Army was asking, for chaplains kind of like myself, who come from naturally ecumenical, naturally pluralistic denominations, if they would consider, coming on. And so, and besides, I was 40, and so I was due for a midlife crisis. And so we, my wife and family, they signed up for it, and we've just been on kind of a journey for the last 2.5 years since then. So it's been amazing. It's truly kind of a testament to the ways in which, when you answer that calling, right? When you say, "Here I am," like, you have no clue where it's going to all end up.
Yeah. And that's a distinct, you talk about ministry getting broad in seminary. I can imagine as a chaplain, you're not only in an ecumenical, but in some places secular and even interfaith kind of space. So what are some of you've talked a lot about how much joy it brings you. What are some of the challenges? You talked about it being physical, but what are some of the other challenges of serving in that context?
I mean, so some of the challenges, I mean, so there's immediate challenges. For instance, like, when you get deployed to Iraq,
Mm-hmm.
there is the challenge of overcoming a lot of fear, right? You sit there and wonder whether or not, for your own personal safety. Because, when I deploy to these places, like I don't carry a weapon. I have someone assigned to help protect things. And so that's a challenge. There is a fear, kind of woven into this thing. One of the other challenges is kind of what you're speaking to. Um, when I was a congregational pastor, like I knew who my congregation was.
Mm-hmm.
They came to us, and so like everything that we geared was tailored towards like a pretty specific, focus group. When I do this now, the bulk of my brigade, so I have about 4,700 service members that I minister to. The majority of them aren't religious. And then even within that, the religiosity, I mean, it's Roman Catholic, it's Buddhist, it's evangelical, it's liturgical, we have quite a few Muslim soldiers and Jewish soldiers, quite a few pagan soldiers, and so like the challenge then is, okay, well, how do I maintain relevancy with such diversity, and then also how do I help these service members live into and protect their constitutional rights, the free exercise of religion, even when some of those worship practices don't reflect anything that I've ever seen before.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of a challenge. I think that's about it. I feel good about that answer,
Yeah, I mean
Terri.
that's I was on the advisory board at the University of Chicago's advisory board for CPE, clinical pastoral education, and I know that even some hospital contexts can be very multi-faith or no faith or anti-faith, and so that's always, I think, a challenge for us to learn how to be present in those spaces. Can you maybe share a story about when you really saw God at work in your ministry?
So to me, one of the beautiful things about chaplaincy is that it so often mirrors the stories that we see in Jesus in the Gospels,
Mhm.
right? Like these are stories where Jesus, along the way, encounters situations of hopelessness and helps transform those moments through the very real presence of God. And so, like, military chaplaincy is a lot like that. One of the stories that I've told is, my first night in Iraq, I was completely terrified, um, completely never wanted to leave my room. It was a room in a bunker, and, and yet in the middle of the night I had to use the restroom, and so like I was just so disappointed in myself because, I told my wife later, I was like, man, if I ended up getting blown up because I had to use the restroom, like that is like one of the most unglorious ways
Mhm.
to have to explain that to your kids, and yet in the middle of all that, in the middle of all that uncertainty, in the middle of all that night, in the middle of a place that was just so literally foreign to so many, I was in this. It's a big trailer that has showers and restrooms in it. There was a soldier that I had kind of gotten to know, and it was probably like in the 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, and that soldier had just like learned that his relationship back home was over, and he learned it through social media of all sacred places. And so like in the brokenness of that moment, in the midst of all that uncertainty, like that was the place of ministry.
Mm.
um, and because even though at the time I was just like, okay, well, maybe I can arrange this for a better time or a different time. There was this kind of this voice kind of in the back that was like, this is a moment. This is a moment that's sacred.
Mhm.
Despite how disgusting that restroom was, and it was disgusting.
Mhm.
Uh,
Mhm.
like this is a place
Mhm.
for healing. And so, we got to be authentic. We got to be vulnerable. We got to be broken. But most of all, in that moment, the service member got to experience like prayer, and someone willing to walk alongside him,
Mhm.
um, just like Jesus walks alongside us wherever we go. And and I personally believe that part of that place where Jesus walks with us is in some of the most challenging, difficult geopolitical places around our world. So that's a big one for me.
Oh gosh, wow. Walking Jesus along the way, being with others in those difficult and hard spaces. That's awesome. I think as ministers, we all find those particular spaces, and you layer that on top of, as you said, the fear, the uncertainty, the imminent physical danger,
Yeah.
right? And what you're providing to those person service persons. We are just grateful for that. Um, we've been talking as a church. I've been talking about we have to imagine who we must be as a new church in a new world, and inviting people, as Walter Brueggemann says, to get inside God's imagination, which is expansive and limitless. As you think about that idea of imagining the future of the church, um, what role do you think chaplains can play in this work of us being a new church? I know you've given some thought to that, so I'd love to hear you share on that idea.
Well, I think that chaplains are essential to that conversation, right? Like I always imagine that the unfolding future of the church is a dialogue between God and God's people, and part of that conversation has to include the voices of chaplains because of the places that we serve, right? Like so, when I was a congregational pastor, again, I had a pretty homogeneous place of being, even in a congregation like Saguaro that was so integrated into the fabric of Tucson. But like, as our community contexts become even more polarized, we feel that polarization in our church communities to the point where like there's not a lot there's not a lot of difference that we encounter in our church. And so like, but part of the role of being church is to represent and transcend and be that true community. And so if we're going to do that, then like I kind of feel like that we have to relearn how do we talk to and be present in the lives of people who aren't part of the natural affinity groups that have become our churches. Chaplains do that every day. They do it in the hospitals when they go into a room and they have no idea, who that person voted for. They have no idea that person's backstory, whether they're religious or not religious. They see it chaplains see it in prisons. Chaplains see it in the military. Chaplains see it in all these different institutional settings, like universities and whatnot. Every bit of our job is to walk into places and not know what the connection points are going to be, but yet learn how to build those relationships and those connections that are authentic to our calling and authentic to the possibility that exists in the future. And so like those are all really hard conversations for the church. And I think that it's helpful then to have those voices of deeply committed, authentic, and from the disciple standpoint, I feel like that we have some of the best chaplains, institutional, hospital, hospice, prison that exists in all of North America. And so those voices have a lot to add to that conversation with the future of the church.
Yeah. And I want to thank you for even the ways in which you've engaged me to advocate, right, for the acknowledgement and recognition of the important ministry that all of our chaplains do. We're also grateful for Tom Yates and his work as our chaplain endorser in DHM, and the support that he provides. And I know that GCOM has been working to really do a much better job of reaching out to particularly our military chaplains who are deployed, and even hospital chaplains who don't often have the same kind of networks that you have as a congregational pastor. With regional life, if you're deployed, then there's no regional assembly that you can get to. So thank you for your helping me in my own leadership better understand those issues. And speaking of assemblies, you're going to be our opening night preacher for the General Assembly in Louisville. And in the few minutes, seconds that we have here, tell us a little bit about what that experience you think what does it mean to you to do that? And why do you think it's important for us to be together at General Assembly?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I told my kids, after it became public, thinking that maybe I will have accomplished something in my life that would impress my kids, and they were not impressed. And so I feel like that's part of parenting. But for me, it's a big. I mean, it really is it's a very humbling honor. Like I couldn't believe when I got asked, for a variety of reasons. Like, I mean, I've been going to General Assemblies for forever, and I can still remember, sermons from those assemblies. Like, and so like the weight and the opportunity of that is something that I don't take for granted. The second part is, I mean, it's happening in Louisville, and so like that's my backyard. That's just down the road from where I grew up. Like I've had friends from my childhood who heard about it. They're like, "Oh, we're gonna come, and hear it." And so it's a unique opportunity to hopefully, go against the odds and go back to your hometown and be able to say something of worth. But yeah, it's an amazing opportunity. I mean, I'm a big fan of General Assemblies. On the one hand, like, is there anything that speaks to the heart of the Disciples Church than all of us getting together with all of our beautiful messiness, and coming together in worship from all across the country, realizing that our congregational entities, they reflect so much of the fabric of the communities that they're in. And so like it really is such an amazing cross section of America. And so I love that aspect of it. I love that it's not intentionally, like, it's not always clean. We get into those discussions on resolutions, and I remember after I'd been serving a church for a little bit, and it was one of the second general assemblies that I attended after becoming a senior pastor. I was like, I don't know why we do this. Like, we intentionally like open the door for like disagreement and strife, and we seem to relish it. And so, but at the same time, like, as keep going to these, like, that's actually one of my favorite parts, because I feel like that one of the ways that Disciples Church can be such a beautiful prophetic tradition to the American public is to embody healthy, spiritually centered disagreement. And so yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Hopefully there's not too many disagreements and protests about my sermon, but we'll see.
I am sure that you will be a blessing, and I'm sure that you will be someone will be sitting out there and remember that year that Owen Chandler preached. I'm sure that um, God will speak through you, and that you'll have a word to say to the whole church. And yeah, walking together even when we disagree, and it's probably my chance to remind the church that we're going to be talking about how it is that how we do dialogue and discuss things at this next assembly. But Chaplain Owen Chandler, thank you so much for spending this time with me and talking about your chaplain experiences. And I hope that the whole church is ready and is going to be there on Saturday night, July 29th, 2023 in Louisville, Kentucky. Um, we're bringing one of your homeboys back, Kentucky, so be there to support him. Thank you so much, Owen, for spending this time with us.
Thanks, GMP.
Thank you. Well, I hope that you have learned a little bit more about particularly the complex work and the rewarding work of those who serve our military as chaplains. There are so many disciples, clergy who also serve as hospital chaplains, university chaplains. We're just grateful for the ministry of chaplaincy among us. And I hope that you will join me in Louisville, Kentucky, July 29th through August 1st, 2023. And on that opening night worship, we will hear from Chaplain Owen Chandler. So God bless you, disciples. Thank you for spending this time with me. I'll see you on the next episode of Imagine with Me. And remember, God loves you, and so do I. Take care.